Hey Shane, how you doing?
Good. Yourself?
I'm good. Just watching the rain.
We got plenty of it.
hmm
We the only two so far?
Oh no, Commissioner Parks just jumped on, and so did it says Doug's iPad, which I don't know if that means Doug Van Amberg or Doug Hall, but I'm guessing Doug Van Amberg because I think Doug Hall is not going to be making it. So I think he's been pretty busy working on 109 North Main Street. So
Nah.
Thatcher, I need to share my screen.
Are we here?
Not quite. We're working through a technical thing right now. 1 second.
Hello.
Welcome.
What's going on?
Another day in paradise.
There we go. You suppose it'll rain?
No, I think it's done.
Well, nobody's gonna mow this week.
No, next week I'm gonna have to bail. I should have mowed yesterday.
Yeah.
Don't worry, the HOA will send you a letter.
I know.
Yeah.
Actually, they've learned not to bother me about my yard. I get a little PO'd. They did that one year. They sent me a letter, told me to mow my grass. I called them. I said, I mowed it 3 days ago and it's rained since. What would you like me to do about it? Like sometimes they just lack common sense.
Well, I don't see Commissioner Denderont. Don't know who Jeffrey Jones is, but they're on the meeting. So,
All right. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
well, Mr. Chair, I think the floor is yours. Commissioner Denderont was supposed to be here. I don't know. So you may begin at your leisure.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of
States of
America,
America.
to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Chair, can you go ahead and call the meeting to order first before we continue?
Like to call this meeting to order.
Thank you.
We want to repeat the pledge.
No, at this point, we can move forward with the invocation if you'd like.
Darren, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Would you please?
Oh, dear Heavenly Father, be with us this evening as we do the business for the city and the community. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Well, this should be a relatively brief meeting. I'm assuming most of you have read the agenda packet, but it should be relatively light, but we'll launch into it. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions. I will be keeping an eye on YouTube. We are streaming live on YouTube, and the citizens of Goddard are welcome to have any comments on YouTube if they would like, and we'll be checking the live feed. They'll have to state the first and last name of where they live, and I'll be monitoring it just in case there are any citizens' questions. But as you know, this is following all of the Kansas Open Meeting Act and Kansas Open Records Act. So we're in line with that according to the Attorney General. So we are going to proceed just like last Planning Commission. And like I said, please state whenever you make a motion or a second, just state your first and last name, just so I can double record it and make sure everything has been approved. So moving forward. This will be item C, approval of the agenda. This is for approve the agenda for May 11th, which is today, 2020, Planning Commission regular meeting.
Darren Klein, I approve the agenda.
Shane Grafing, I'll second.
Anything?
Let me unmute it. How about all in favor?
Aye.
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 Unanimous.
Very good. Commissioner Denderont, thank you for joining us. Moving on. This would be item D, citizens' comments. As mentioned before, we'll be keeping an eye on YouTube just to see if there are any additional comments. So I'm going to stop the share real fast and then I'll jump back on just to double check. But let me go ahead and take a quick look.
Oh, there's everybody bigger.
Like, looks like YouTube is experiencing some trouble with the live stream. Thatcher, can you double check the YouTube stream?
Yeah, there are no comments on the YouTube stream, Micah.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, the floor is yours. Let me move back to sharing, of course, that might be helpful. Okay, 1 second. Okay.
We're looking for a motion.
Well, at this point, if there's no comments, so Mr. Chair, it's at your leisure if you would like to close this section of citizens' comments. We don't see any YouTube comments at this point, so you can close this portion of citizens' comments if you would like.
Like to close the comments.
Okay. Moving forward. Item E, this will be approval of the minutes. So this is approval of the regular meeting minutes from April 13th, 2020. Quick review, we approved 301 East First Street. It was a conditional use permit for a detached garage that exceeded 720 square feet. That was approved unanimously. They also approved vacation and dedication of the Arbor Creek entrance. This was approved by the Planning Commission. And then 7 Cedar Street site plan that was also approved by the Planning Commission. So at this point, we'd be looking for an approval of the regular meeting minutes for April 13th, 2020.
Do I hear a motion?
I make a motion. Go ahead,
First and
Dave.
last name?
I make a motion, we approve the minutes.
Coin, I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Unanimous.
Was that
Coin with second.
Coin a second? Thank you very much. So just a quick review. This will be a pretty brief meeting in terms of agenda, simply because right now Board of Zoning, none. That's for item F. Item G, old business, there is none. And item H, new business, there is none. We've come to this point in the annual review of policy and revisions. And so it's kind of this up and down period where each planning commission either has very light agenda or very busy agenda. And this happens to be a lighter one as we get policy written up and brought before Time Sentinel for publishing. And so there's always that review period and a lot of time by state law. And so this happens to be a lighter agenda, but this gives us more time for city planner update on the city and any questions and comments by the planning commission. So moving forward, staff report, city planner staff report. I will say that residential growth continues as the Q1 permits has exceeded the Q1 2019 permits. So in quarter one of 2019, we had 9 building permits, and in quarter one 2020, we had 11. So we're actually ahead in terms of growth for building permits for this year, and that's in spite of the coronavirus. It's be hard to determine how this will be effective, the coronavirus will affect the city long term. I think that we're still seeing pretty strong growth. As you know, we Planning Commission as well as the governing body approved 3 new subdivisions, Rusty Creek, Arbor Creek, and Cloverleaf. So we have plenty of lots available for sale and home building. So I don't anticipate building permits to slacken during this time. And it is a speculation of many, myself included, that real estate is considered a relatively safe haven for money. And so capital is being put into residential and commercial and multifamily development. And I don't anticipate us to slow down since we have plenty of space for annexation and growth. And we are very open to business in Goddard. So Elk Ridge subdivision and St. Andrews subdivision continue to fill, and phase 3 of Elk Ridge has sold its first, I think I said lot, but it should be a building permit. 227 Cedar Street is working on pulling a building permit for the threeplex that's approved for rezoning, so they're getting the financing put in line. And the Cloverleaf is going through the pre-construction phase. I will say that I just today got off the phone with Denise Vaughn of Bachman, and she is working diligently towards the lot splits that will be required for the twin homes within Cloverleaf. So that will be coming before you shortly. Boundary line adjustments, as you know, can be approved in-house by the community development director being myself or the city planner being myself. Lot lines or lot splits cannot be approved in-house. They have to be approved by the planning commission. So that will be coming before you sometime soon. And that's for Cloverleaf, which is right behind the Ace and Gingers and that general location right off Casado. So that'll be coming before you shortly. Feel free to stop me at any time if you have any additional questions or comments. Commercial growth continues at a slower rate, which is not unusual. Typically, commercial follows residential, so we're seeing that kind of happen, and we're keeping an eye out for any sort of hiccups that may have occurred during the coronavirus pandemic. But we still have seen new businesses moving into Goddard. In particular, 109 North Main Street and Goddard Outdoor Power have moved into Goddard. Goddard Outdoor Power has moved into the building that used to be the Goddard Gunnery. And 109 North Main Street is having a beauty salon moved in, as well as having T&T moved to the back. Javens and Mrs. Cole's Snow Cone is still on the front. And we are encouraging and in the process right now of working towards having the coffee shop move into that garage in between Javens and the beauty salon. So things are moving forward for our main street, and we're hoping to look at possibly in the next couple of years, sort of a revitalization of the main street. And we're looking at what that could be from just sort of a general design concept.
Cool. What is the Goddard Outdoor Power?
What is Goddard Outdoor Power?
Yeah.
Well, it's a commercial, but also residential power company that's not like lawnmowers. It's basically lawnmowers, freestanding lawnmowers, your general appliances, from what I understand. I don't know all of what they have in terms of inventory. I would encourage everybody who's watching and anybody in attendance to go ahead and visit them. They went ahead and pulled a sign permit, so they have the new Goddard Outdoor Power on the front of the building. You'll notice that right when you're driving by. From what I understand, it should be lawnmowers, things of that nature. Like I said, I don't know all the details of what's inside.
Cool.
Goddard Gunnery has moved over to just to the east of the liquor store. So they are taking up a previously vacant spot, and so we are excited to have more commercial growth happening along our 54 and Kellogg frontage. So that's pretty nice.
Cool. Guns and alcohol in the same building. Awesome.
I'm sure we're all grateful for the sales taxes that go on. So regardless of the use, Tanganyika is open again. I myself have visited it just last weekend with the kids and my wife. They are allowing a select amount of people to go in at certain times. And I am happy to report from a firsthand perspective that the splash park is in construction. So just visiting the penguin exhibit and the sloths just right next to it, the splash park is in construction. So it'll
Cool.
be pretty exciting once that comes up and running. I can confirm, having spoke with the Public Works Director, Brooke Vandenberg, that they did place a meter for that. So we're pretty excited to have the water consumption for that, but also just the new amenities that will be going into Tanganyika, and the added benefit of having attractions and the tourism start to pick back up from having that coronavirus downturn. So we're pretty excited about that. This is a map that I've put together for the governing body, and I figure I might as well share it as well with the Planning Commission, since it's interesting to kind of give an overall perspective of what Goddard looks like from a residential perspective. Mind you, this is not necessarily commercial, this is a residential perspective. As you will notice in the orange, St. Andrew is at full capacity, 100%. No more lots for sale. All the lots have been sold. Mr. Paul Kelsey is the developer for St. Andrews. He was also the developer for the Seasons and for Spring Hill. And if you notice, the yellow one, Cloverleaf, will be the new adventure project for Mr. Kelsey. And that's the one that's sort of in work right now. They've gone through the pre-construction phase. There is a total of 133 lots available. I will mention that 6 of those lots on the west side are actually commercial lots. So there's that as well. But we anticipate those to fill up pretty quickly. Elk Ridge is moving forward. We anticipate there's some available 22 lots left in Elk Ridge, and that includes the new phase 3 of Elk Ridge. So, for my understanding, speaking with the developer, Mr. Chris Stevens, that things are going exceptionally well. There may be some talks of another Elk Ridge phase 2, if you will, or Elk Ridge next addition to the north, but it'll be completely up to the developer whether or not he can work out an arrangement with the farm owner to the north of the existing Elk Ridge. So residential growth is strong in Goddard. We really cannot approve enough lots to be platted and to keep up with the demand. People want to be in Goddard. They understand it's a great school district. It's safe. And it's got low taxes for property. So everyone has been jumping on board, and quite honestly, we can't keep up with the demand. Our supply is right behind the demand. And that's why I think everybody has noticed their property values increasing, simply because the demand is pushing the property values up, and but people are willing to pay those just to be in the Goddard School District and to be near the amenities like Tanganyika and Lydiard Park and everything else that Goddard has to offer. So really excited about that. I'll leave that up for a little bit for those who enjoy looking at numbers. Moving on. I'm currently working on an R4 or a higher density zoning classification. This would be something that we can incorporate 0 lot lines, which is similar to the central business district, and no minimums on square footage per dwelling unit. As you know, our highest density is R3. And that's sort of multifamily or 3 units or more. Now, R3 doesn't necessarily preclude single family or duplexes or twin homes. And I don't think R4 will either. I think for the point of if we did rezone any single family R1 as an R4 along those lines, we wouldn't want to exclude the possibility of having a single family detached for financing purposes. You don't want any banks or appraisers to ask if all of a sudden a whole bunch of single family detached is considered non-conforming uses. But we want to look at the possibility of what it is to have an R4 or higher density zoning classification in close proximity to our central business district, or into certain portions of old Goddard or traditional Goddard, where the housing stock is sort of an older housing stock, and what this would look like. As mentioned, the central business district doesn't have any setback requirements, And it's something that came up, one of the planning commissioners actually, when we were speaking over coffee, mentioned the fact that renters don't necessarily need yards or even necessarily require yards, and it's not even something that they would consider when moving into Goddard. And I think the original concept for 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit, which is under the R3 zoning classification, was in order to maintain yards. I think backyards is something that could be encouraged with this new zoning classification, but I think there is nothing that could preclude the possibility of having architecture that was right up to the front of a lot line and simply have more row homes or something of that architectural significance that still allowed for backyards, but maybe no front yards. And that would actually allow the city to maximize the land use on smaller lots and allow for lots that are sort of non-traditional lots or smaller lots that even couldn't allow for a single family detached housing because the lot size of the square footage of the lot is too small. This would be something that would allow for maybe more row homes to be put in on sort of non-traditional lots or lots that were platted back in the 1950s and 60s. And so this kind of allows for more flexibility, a zoning classification that will allow for more flexibility of design potential in an otherwise non-conforming lot situation or higher density for people that would want to capitalize on empty lots or older housing infrastructure in Goddard. Something we're just looking. Go ahead.
Would there be, and you may have said this, but I didn't quite catch everything. Is there a limit on the number of dwelling units on a lot in this? Like,
Number of
could it be
dwelling
like,
units?
what, I mean, could it be like, 4 apartments or what?
Right. So right now we're just looking into what it could be. So right now R4 does not exist. We're working at crafting it. So
Right.
that's a good question. Do we want to have a maximum or a minimum? And it's something that we can look into. The big idea first would be sort of how does it fit? Is it going to be, would it be a good fit on portions of Goddard that are empty lots? Why have those lots sat vacant for so long?
Mm-hmm.
For example, 227 is the prime example of that, sat vacant for 2 decades. For the single family housing market, it was considered too high of a price since it was near our central business district and Goddard was growing. So sort of outpriced the single family market, but it was
Right.
just the right price for the multifamily market. And so would an R4 zoning, which allowed for a wide swath of land uses, I'm sorry, a wide array of land uses, I should say, would that type of flexibility allow the private sector to take advantage of those empty lots and let the city work in tandem with the private sector to fill in all those empty lots and potentially allow developers to take over housing that's foreclosed or housing that's become dilapidated or blighted?
Mhm.
There's several properties in Old Goddard, for example, north of Santa Fe and south of 54, west of Goddard Road. I'm sure several of you on the panel already, can think of a couple just off the top of your head, housing that
Mhm.
has sort of exceeded its life or has become run down over the years. One property in particular, 327 North Goddard Road, which was approved by the Planning Commission last year for conditional use permit for a duplex, was originally a single family house. And the developer and the property owner who owns it wanted to convert it to a duplex for the sake of recapturing some of that lost revenue. And so that was approved and rightfully so. Housing can be expensive to rent a single family house, even in parts of Goddard that you can traditionally consider, sort of the older portions of Goddard. So some of it can be reasonably priced, but it's not abnormal to see somebody rent a single family detached house in Goddard for $1,300, $1,400 a month. And so that's kind of where,
Mhm.
how do you manage the private sector and how does the public sector kind of work in tandem with the private sector for development purposes without compromising core values that we feel are integral to the city? So in terms of 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit, that is an R3 zoning requirement. As you know, for example, once again, 227 Cedar was at 13,000, right around 13,900. So it was shy of about 1,100 square feet from having an additional dwelling unit put on. They wanted to have 5 dwelling units, but R3 prohibited it because you would need 15,000 square feet to have 5 dwelling units at 5 dwelling units per 3,000 square feet. And so
Mhm.
it was kind of an arbitrary requirement. And that was something that one of the planning commissioners brought up, that perhaps square footage was a requirement for yards. And that is something that renters, especially millennials or Generation Z, they don't necessarily want to maintain yards when you're renting a property. It may be a backyard, but a front yard and a backyard is something that you would see in a more single family detached neighborhood. And so you have that opportunity to put more dwelling units on a property by removing that restriction, that minimum restriction of 3,000
Mhm.
square feet per dwelling unit. So that's sort of the general idea that we're looking at. How can we do that? How can we increase density without undercutting some of the single family detached housing?
Cool.
This is our current zoning map. As you can see, yellow is single family detached. Darker green is what you would call a PUD or planned unit development. The sort of purple pink, that's our commercial district. The lighter green, which is kind of clashes with the yellow, so it's kind of hard to discern, is our R3. Orange is our R2.
Mm.
Gray is our industrial. Blue is our R1A, which is a minimum square footage requirement for single family detached. And we do have an R1B. It is not in place anywhere right now. It's what you would call floating zoning classification. R4, if we did craft it and it was approved by the Planning Commission and by the governing body, would become a floating classification until we could designate where we'd want to put it. So very similar to R1B, which is another low density minimum square footage single family detached zoning classification. So R4 would be a high density zoning classification that'd be floating until we can kind of determine where it would want to be implemented. So, but it's sort of would be a tool in the tool belt that you can use at a later time, just if you
Mhm.
want to take into consideration market trends and how it would be applied. At this point, we move right on into planning commissioner comments, and my report is done, and feel free to comment.
Have we heard anything from the old Chicago?
No, I haven't heard anything from Old Chicago. I heard bids were still going out, but I don't know. I hadn't heard that it was stopped. I hadn't heard that it was necessarily moving forward. I just still heard they were collecting bids. I haven't reached out to them in a while. I was sort of going to wait until the governor sort of relaxed all the restrictions and the state kind of got brought up to a sort of a normative state. I realized restaurants were considered, and I don't know if they're considered the highest or the most exposed, but they are one of the most exposed markets during the coronavirus outbreak. And so we don't know about Old Chicago, at least right now. I don't know about Old Chicago fully. And I don't know about Brahms either.
So this isn't really considered with buildings, but it's a question that I've had asked me a couple times is on the baseball fields. Is anybody, are we going ahead? Are they gonna, I know the city baseball is not gonna happen, but anybody know about the Genesis fields, if they're gonna do baseball? You heard anything, Micah?
We ran baseball for a little bit before the coronavirus kind of had its way.
Mhm.
So there were several games on the weekends that were going pretty strong. I don't know, and you're gonna have to forgive me, but being sort of unfamiliar with the baseball season, I don't know how long the baseball season lasts. They may have some more games, but I would have to check in on that. That's a good question. I don't know how long the baseball season lasts, but I can check with the baseball director for Genesis. So let me make an inquiry towards him and see what he says.
Just, I don't know if anybody had heard.
I did talk to the Fabers, Jody, and
Okay.
according to Jory, they're gonna play. They're supposed to play their games there, but again, that's dependent on if they have a season.
Yeah. Because I knew in the governor's phase thing, I mean, it was like phase 2, it said that organized sports could open up, but that wasn't real clear what that meant. And, you know,
Mhm.
Dax is supposed to be umpiring, but he hasn't heard anything either. So, didn't know.
And phase 2, you're gonna have to refresh my memory. When does phase 2 kick into play? Is it June 1st?
May 18th is the earliest.
May?
Should be an announcement Friday.
Okay.
Okay.
I know some teams are starting to practice, whether that's allowed or not.
So Micah, on the R4 zoning thing, will you just, I mean, how does that get approved, or do you bring it before the planning commission? We look at it, or how does that, what's the process?
No, I
on
just
that?
approve everything. No. I have to bring it before you guys know. No, I first, what happens, yeah, it's a very good question. Well, first, I have to go through a long process of racking my brain and figuring out just exactly how we want to tailor this type of zoning classification in such a way that it's complementary, right? That's something what we want to see. Something that's both complementary to existing land uses, but also flexible and sensitive to market changes. And so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to do some initial research and kind of do some figuring out how we want to tailor this sort of zoning classification. Because what you've probably seen, and that was one of the comments from a previous citizen that had mentioned that they'd worked very diligently on creating the zoning classification. But the zoning hadn't changed in 2 decades. And so what we were running into was sort of this rigidity of the zoning, and market forces were pushing on it. We really couldn't, there's only so much you can wiggle within the zoning without it simply, you just can't, we have to simply say, I'm sorry, you can't go higher, you can't
Right.
go down. It's just the way the zoning is. And so what happens is, if you create a new zoning classification, you have a new tool that you can use at least maybe for 5 years.
Right.
The private sector is heavily integrated with the public sector, and we're the public sector, right? And the private sector is heavily integrated with the public sector, but the private sector moves at such a faster cadence than the public sector does. And Commissioner Parks can probably attest to this very dramatically. It's just what you're allowed to do in the public sector is just a slow pace as they change over time, where the private sector just goes really, really fast in response to markets. And so our zoning hadn't changed in such a long time that as we're seeing these new market trends come in, we're sort of stuck in this rigidity from maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And so if you create a new zoning classification, the hope is that it allows for enough flexibility from the private sector that you don't have to then turn around and start asking for all these amendments to our existing code. As you know, we've approved a change to the zoning classification for R1. We've approved a zoning classification change for the PUD. And these things are in line with the private sector. It's just we don't want to go back and then change all of our zoning classifications. We'd rather just create one new one that becomes a little bit more flexible, that can meet those private sector demands, taking into account the fact that at some point that too will have to change down the road.
Right.
But the zoning classifications are not meant to be static, like long-term for decades. They're supposed to be somewhat sensitive to to
Mhm.
market changes and being aware of how the city can work in tandem with the private sector to get Goddard built and continue to grow in a sustainable way that doesn't compromise values that Goddard holds dear and integral
Right.
to its nature. And that's kind of where that balance comes in of saying, well, we want the single family detached, but we also value density. Excuse me. We
Right.
also value density in certain areas because we know that density helps support and buttress the commercial. And so where can they go? Where the various fit and how can they be complementary? That's where the R4 comes in.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Mhm. I will say, I forgot to mention is that I looked into the 227 Cedar with the two lots that were under one parcel for the planning commissioner's request to look into that. I'm happy to report that according to Neil Straw, I spoke with Neil Straw, the senior planner in Wichita and MABC Sedgwick County. And a parcel is a zoning classification essentially. So if two lots are under one parcel, that's considered one zoning lot. So no, we don't need to vacate the boundary line between the two lots. It's acceptable if you do, but it's not necessary because that parcel ties those two lots together. And that's to answer Commissioner Park's question of do they need to do a boundary line vacation between those two? And the answer is no, since it's under one parcel. But they would if it was two separate parcels to join those two together. The other question that came up from the previous planning commission was the percentage of wainscoting that needed to happen on residential. I didn't see anything. I continued to look and there's a good chance not a good chance, but there's a possibility I might be missing it, but it may have been an informal recommendation or an informal request by the planning commission that wasn't actually in the planning commission subdivision bylaws. And so I'm looking into that some more. It may have been on a previous subdivision requirement, but I don't see it right now. And so that might be something that the planning commission would like to adopt is a requirement for residential to have a certain percentage of wainscoting on the frontage or something along those lines, similar to the commercial district. But it's something that we can look into as well. Mr. Chair, the floor is yours for planning commissioner comments at this point.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, the floor is yours. You can ask for more commissioner comments or we can move forward. It's totally up to you at this point.
I think we should move forward.
Okay, at this point, we would move towards adjournment. Item K. Next regular planning commission meeting would be on June 8th, 2020 at 7 p.m. So with no additional comments, questions, or concerns, Mr. Chair, you can look for a motion to adjournment.
I'd like to hear a motion.
Darren, I make a motion to adjourn.
Point, I'll second it.
All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
We're out of here.
Thank you very much. You guys have a great night, and I will see you on June 8th. And stay safe.
You too,
Thank
Micah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.